Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review three movies. At the end of the day, I have been watching quite a bit of HBO product, looking through the HBO app, and in fact, watching quite a bit of that. So, I had been able to watch Alita Battle Angel, and I had been able to watch Us on the HBO app. In fact, you can watch seemingly a ton of stuff on HBO, more than you probably know. You can watch movies also like The Meg. You can watch movies also like Ma, which I just gotten done watching, and maybe I'll do a review of that fairly soon. Ultimately, I'm going to start getting out of my way to definitely start going and watching it chapter 2, and then eventually I'm going to be watching The Watchmen, the first season of The Watchmen as well, that show, you know? So, also, Jacob's Ladder was something that I was able to watch on a movie called Crackle, or an app called Crackle, not a movie. CRACKLE, Crackle. So you can watch the original Jacob's Ladder on that app for free. Um, Ideally, I'm going through a crap ton of apps, so I dare in fact will have like a combo platter of different kind of things. You can watch Alita and Us with a 7-day free trial currently at the second of this recording of the HBO app. So there, in fact, yeah, you can watch a ton of stuff of HBO. So let's go in to talk about all these movies because there, of course, is three of them. So at the end of the day, how did I feel about all these films? I don't know if I'm gonna go out of my way to spoil every single one of them. Because ultimately there might be some spoiler additions that I feel like, or some cryptic talking about this movie that I feel like there isn't a lot to go further upon into spoilers. That we might get to that aspect. So let's go and talk about Alita, Battle Angel. In all actuality, some people like might look at this and just cringe, or might just go, it's another just kind of one of those like chucking out there kind of films just to see if anybody will actually legitimately go and see it. Ba ba ba. At the end of the day, I could just say that in the simplest way possible, this movie was fun. This movie was fun. Looking at it, you can ultimately say, in a cryptic sense, this movie or this script tends to just adjust a lot to sound cooler, like a cooler movie. It does tend to tell like 50 movies or 50 different stories in 2 hours. It really does feel like it really crams a lot in there. It really crams within that 2 hours, as if it wants to just like. I feel like this movie had like a ton probably left in the drawing room floor. Like I'm sure there's probably a ton of like maybe extended scenes or deleted scenes or stuff that they like had on the drawing board of which they were going to do but didn't execute. I feel that overall the pacing of this movie was done well. I think that there were times where there was stuff that I felt that I was just kind of like, okay, why did they need to do this story? There was a story aspect in this movie that did feel kind of pointless, or there were stuff that I just kind of felt like yeah, this movie adjusts to be cooler. But when looking at it, I could say that this movie is very reminiscent of every like kind of robo or robotic movie that you've kind of ever seen in your life. It kind of takes a lot of cues from like Real Steel, the Hugh Jackman movie. It kind of goes into doing some RoboCop stuff. At some points, it feels like a lot of animes, like Ghost in the Shell. Um, it kind of does feel like Transformers a little bit with some of the kind of action kind of things. Especially when it kind of gets into them actually doing this, whatever this big sporting event thing is. I think that's where the Transformers feel does come in. Um, Looking at it, this movie feels much more so like an anime than anything else. It feels like an anime movie. It feels like this was taken from a anime story somewhere, and it probably was. Um, because I didn't like look at if there was a prior source material that this was taken from or adapted from or whatever. I just saw this as it was. Looking at this movie, I would go out of my way to say that there there were really interesting risks that this movie took. Interesting risks meaning like adding way too many characters in this movie, adding um like adjusting to where you eventually have like two simultaneous things going on, and but then eventually towards the end of the movie both of those two simultaneous things combine together to make for an interesting ending. I do appreciate that this movie like has this character like really not knowing much of anything and kind of have to like relearn kind of like the steps of life, but it doesn't go into extreme measures where you have to eat up like 40 to an hour's worth of time having this person learn how to walk again, how to read, how to write, how to this, out of that, how to say words, and this and that. Like, no. It seems like the adjustment is quick. This character is curious and does come down to be, like, for a portion of this film, kind of deer in the headlights, but ultimately it seems like eventually she does eventually adjust and then gets memory back because this character has had a prior life connection. Anyways, yeah, this movie was just fun. Like again, this movie was again kind of one of those movies where you can kind of take your brain out and sit it off to the side, and otherwise just not have to like process this movie. It kind of easily does that for you. It kind of gives you interestingly visual characters and gives you a story that kind of can back up those visuals and make you understand why all these things are there. The only thing that there's a couple things that do ultimately bother me. It feels like there's some stuff that feels to just kind of be like recycled into this film. Like, oh hey, like we just kind of want to like we don't want to present anything new. We just kind of want to bring stuff to just kind of recycle it later and show it in a different way later. And I thought that that was kind of annoying. It's like, okay, so we just have characters just to reconfigure them later and have them just recycled to use again later on in the film, kind of knowing full well that like that ultimately I guess I can cryptically just say that I just like I don't want to I'll mention that more in the spoiler variation. um because like I'll ultimately have like a bigger quote thing that ultimately can make people understand where I'm going to head with that. So I don't know. I think I might get into a spoiler of this. I didn't think I would, but I think it might be good to just kind of I hope quickly graze over the movie. So yeah, I think there are more positives about this movie, to be brutally honest, than negatives, but I'm sure people could go into this movie and kind of rip it apart, or kind of just go, okay, well, like, this movie just kind of is like a person holding a door where there's somebody trying to break through it, like a person is like holding the door and they can only hold it for so long, and like 2 hours of holding a door where somebody's trying to break it down and this and that. It could be just like that, where ultimately, like, you're slapping tape on the door, you're trying to throw an extra lock on the door, um, and trying to keep this door as back onto the wall as humanly possible for 2 hours. People could ultimately say that, before eventually, like, the movie does end, and then, like, you don't ever know what happened with that person holding the door. People could honestly say that, where it's just kind of like this movie just, like, adjusts so frequently that it might get you completely just like, why did they do a lot of this stuff? Could ultimately be the consensus for it in a cryptic like sense. So I can see a positive and a negative way about double edged sword going about this film. But at the end of the day, I just want to say I just enjoyed it for what it was. I didn't really overly process this movie and really dissect it and critique it and whatever. I thought it was a fun movie. It gave me so many robotic vibes, if I otherwise didn't say, kind of like RoboCops and Iron Man and Transformers and everything. It just kind of all just worked. It worked out. So without a doubt, I think it's about that time to spoil this movie. I didn't think it was bad. I didn't have a movie that I didn't have this movie in front of me saying anything bad about it. So spoilers. Spoilers. If you guys want to not be spoiled by anything, I might adjust cameras to let you know when spoilers are over. So at the end of the day, be ready for that. If you dare, in fact, want to just go into every other one of these films and not get spoilers. So, spoiler time. Alita, Battle Angel. Spoilers. Within this movie, there is some kind of mixture between her being some kind of like bounty hunter assassin and being this sports athlete, which is just kind of a weird transitional thing of just, hey, this girl might be an athlete, so she could be a deadly assassin as well. It's like, so what? Having that jump from those two extremes, and then eventually the combo platter of mixing these two together, did kind of create a very interesting like film towards the end of it. Like, the cohesion of figuring out how to mix assassin and sport together was kind of really interesting and cool. Uh, I wish that they probably would have gotten within that slower, but then again, it seemed like they never really got into the whole actual like sports angle. Like, they just did not have enough time to actually go into that actual sports angle. Like, she like had a couple of like shots at being of doing this sport or whatever. It just seemed like bizarrely randomly she was just kind of chosen for this sport, and then she just did so effing well off of just one whole match that they dare in fact made her regular. It was weird. So, anyways, within this movie, the only thing that I probably could say that I could go out of my way to say that I don't like is it seems like there was a lot of things recycled for how this girl had to completely beat up all the like assassins within this one bar, or these bounty hunters. She ends up having to fight the exact same bounty hunters and assassins within this sports match. She had to fight the exact same uh complete big huge muscular robot guy in the earlier part of the film, and then they had to have this robot excuse me, this same robot come back, but be this more updated model, and to where, like, dare say that this girl barely got out alive, to have it be mostly that, like, people just ended up, like, scaring the thing away and she didn't actually beat it. I was like, man, that kind of sucks. But anyways, so within this film, within really looking at this film, it was fun. It was fun for just it being like a very futuristic movie that was live action, because you don't get that frequently anymore. Um, a lot of times you could say, well, what is like Star Wars? What is this? What is that? It's like, yeah, but it just doesn't feel like there are much like futuristic movies that are just not something that is of a banner of something like a Star Wars, or like a um or Blade Runner or something like that, that has something to back it up. Um yeah, so anyways, I like future movies, so I ultimately felt like this easily won me over as well. Looking at it though, it seems like the characters that are presented in here are clearly like presented in a very anime like way. It seems like everybody has to have their like one of a kind unique thing. You have like the main boss guy that of course is per usual boss, like the most evil boss guys. You have to have him wear sunglasses all of the time, and even at night. Ooh, another villain with sunglasses. Ooh. But I think the best part is when they have all these robotic assassins that ultimately kind of lend to this story. We have so many guys that otherwise at first um, are eventually kind of going back and forth about helping her, and then ultimately there's a bounty on her, and like everybody is just trying to go out of their way to fight this girl, and like it's gonna get down to the point where like all of these assassins are all dead. And then in my head I'm like, well, what are they gonna do for a sequel if basically everyone has died, if everyone is dead, but the main villain that is kind of this villain that is kind of like a, I guess you can say, a man that's in the clouds kind of villain. Like he's not even actually physically there to dare say go up against this person. Um, yeah, I just feel like the, I think if anything, kind of the like the villain might not exactly make sense. Like the villain doesn't quite make sense in this movie. But again, when looking at it, this movie was just presented to just be fun. It was not presented to be anything else. If anything, this movie was kind of presented like kind of like how Sonic is in my way of thinking. So if this is kind of anything like Sonic is, then I can be happy with it. Like I can just be like, okay, I'm like, no, like this kind of, if this kind of is just like it, I'm okay with it. Yeah, that's how I feel about Alita Battle Angels. Let's move on. Us, 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 us in a very cryptic like sense. So, what is us about in a cryptic like sense? This is honestly a movie that kind of did feel. This movie kind of felt to me like when looking at it, it kind of feels like, do you guys like know when you have like a lawnmower, and like the lawnmower like doesn't really seem to have like a lot of gas in it. It just kind of seems to have like the bare minimum of gas in it. So like when you start to have the lawnmower, like you give it a couple tugs and it kind of goes "Rrr, rrr," and then eventually like you kind of like eventually finally, like, because you're stubborn and you just want to use this last bit of gas and you don't want to get more gas, you just want to just try to see if you can get this to start. and then eventually you finally get the but like it's kind of like the power of the lawnmower just doesn't seem to be like the lawnmower is on, but it doesn't feel like strong enough to really get your like get your grass really going or really cutting. So ultimately you just kind of eventually like towards the end you just kind of like give up and just kind of accept that like eventually you're gonna just go and just eventually just get gas and finish up your yard. um I don't want to say that this was a bad film. Like I just feel that like it was just kind of like stuff kind of like wasn't really quite understood, and then something just kind of like drops out of nowhere, and then like the rest of the movie does get interesting after that aspect. But then again, you're just kind of like, well, like it didn't seem like we spent enough time trying to within this film like understand exactly with what's going on. It seemed like we spent a lot of time for you to invest in this family instead of investing what happens to this family within this movie. Um but ultimately when looking at it, Farewell, the person I believe who either wrote or directed this film, I believe was the guy who did, of course, Key and Peele, and of course also did Get Out. So, like looking at it with the huge success that Get Out was, like I think the guy like give him a mulligan. Like the guy could do, uh, could ultimately do no wrong after whatever he did, and like this movie also had gone and created some buzz as well. This movie. I didn't think Us was a bad film. I think when it actually does pick up and you actually do see where this family has to head, it's like, oh wow, this actually is really interesting, and oh my god, I do really understand this exactly. Because lately I've seen so many kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers movies or Body Snatchers, or ultimately I want to eventually, or I ultimately even saw like the 1950s like uh Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I like just saw that, and then like kind of going into this, um it kind of doesn't actually match up like that, but there in fact it seems really similar. The only big problem that I have is the actual transition of said when like the transition of where like they try to give you an understanding of how this all came about. That still, when trying to piece it together like hours later, still did not really go out of its way to exactly make sense to me. And I guess I can break that down much more in a spoiler kind of thing. And I know a lot of people would just be like, no, it's simple. It's very simple. And I was just like, well, yeah, but it doesn't really quite like it doesn't really quite exactly make sense. It feels like they like quickly glazed over it, and I just felt like this movie just kind of like doesn't really care about how we get to where we get. It just like, hey, here's this cool interesting story within this movie, and enjoy. But like I kind of said, it's like I wish that there was more focus being put on the actual story that was actually interesting, rather than you just kind of waiting for that mower to get started kind of thing. It just kind of goes, kind of just like, kind of feels like that. So, anyways, all right, but yeah, so us, like I still want to go out of my way to say it wasn't a bad film. It was just kind of like I wish that like yeah, it was just kind of like a really wait and see kind of film. It was like I think throughout the entire movie it was just kind of a wait and see of what really was going on. It just kind of felt like more and more and more like it was just wait and see. It wasn't just like, oh my god, like you can understand, but then it's like, okay, like what is this? What is this still? Where is this going? What is the, like, I think even the actors, the characters in the, like, what are you doing? Like, hey, like, I have a car, I have this, what do you want? What do you want from me? Like, I felt like I was kind of in the same boat of like what is going on in this movie? Like, where is this heading to? Like, is this just these people? Is it affecting it worldwide? And the long, like, I'm not a very impatient person because looking at this movie, I was gonna watch it regardless. Like, I was just kind of like trying to figure out like what this whole thing was going on while it was like going on. Like even like throughout the entire thing of like going, oh, okay, well, like I get it. It's kind of very much like Body Snatchers esque, but then like yeah, it's just kind of like, but what exactly like what exactly is the main goal? What is the, excuse me, what is the main goal of, excuse me, the reason why people were doing the things they were? It didn't quite make sense. So, looking at it, I think it's about that time to go into spoilers about this movie because I'm just kind of going on and on about just kind of like the same things where it's kind of like, yeah, it didn't make sense, or it just kind of like, yeah, it didn't quite get the momentum it needed, but yeah. So let's go on, talk about this movie in spoilers. If you have seen it or you just kind of want to hear what I have to say anyways, then by all means, let's go into the spoilers of Us. And then when I shift the camera, you guys can get a cryptic like sense of Jacob's ladder, and then spoilers after that. Yeah. So us, us. So we get it to where a bulk of the beginning of this film is just us really getting to know this family. How this family has to have a boat that seems to just barely work. It seems like they have to all go into a car and listen to music together. They all have to eventually go into a beach at some point, where evidently there is some just kind of like circus, or kind of this like not circus. It's kind of like a goofy mirror thing that is just kind of still there, like kind of like the Bizarro mirror kind of amusement park like thing that you can kind of go into and see all these Bizarro mirrors. Because evidently, this mother's past goes into that she was with her mother and father, and she went to this park, and that park led her to meeting her, I guess, mirror self. So evidently, all of these people in this town have this bizarro, like, mirrored self that eventually comes out and goes out of their way to attack them. And every single one of them all have the same colored jumpsuits on, which doesn't really quite seem to really make sense. I'm like, wait a minute. So, like, are these things just kind of like this doesn't really like, all of a sudden we just bizarrely have just like this mirrored universe that wants to just say hello and say hi and come after these people, and I'm like, why? I just don't really quite grasp the fact. And then there's quite a few times when looking at these characters, the opposite end of themselves are either kind of much more like aged, or much more like makeup up to look deformed in some kind of way, not look exactly like them, because they have to be like their opposites for most of the point. Um, like looking back at it, like looking at like the one family that has the girls that were doing all the cartwheels and stuff like that. like they had it to where like the father had like slick back hair, and like the mother looked much more like disheveled than like she was when she was at this home. Like to where like the main focal pointed family just kind of had like one girl's like the mother's hair was up, um like the mother's hair was like down, and then her mirror like self had her hair like up in the air. You had like the little girl on the, I guess you can call it the good side, her hair was in a bun, and the doppelganger mirror girl was like having her hair down. And yeah, it's like, oh yeah, telling true doppelganger s like things, that every one of these things have to look differently than this and that. Anyways, I really did not understand why all of these like supposed creatures, I guess maybe when they all defeated their doppelgangers, they all just went back and to do this like Red Rover like game where they all just had to all just line up into this line and just stand there, because I guess they had nothing better to do. So I guess once they won, they would just go into this line and just otherwise just like line all up and just like, yeah, we're here. It's like, yeah, we're just here lined up. I didn't quite understand what the whole like lining up aspect of it was. I didn't really quite understand what the purpose of that was. If eventually like they were just gonna like maybe like span through the entire town within a line and just kind of like go through town and just kind of like check and see if anybody's left at that point. Looking at it, it seemed like the at every single aspect, it seems that the mirrored people were not going to get defeated at all. It just seemed like they, like no matter how many times you could like smash a bat over something um or whatever, it seems like eventually these things were eventually going to get back up. When also looking at this, I didn't quite understand when I felt that when this mirrored family does appear within the focal pointed family, like at first they like start to call the cops, and then like ultimately all these people just decide to otherwise just like be in their home. Like when in all actuality, when lives are on the line, like it just seemed like that this mirrored family was just playing with their food. Like this mirrored family was really just playing with their food, and I just like, man, they're really dragging this out. Like it's kind of funny though, because this this one focal point, a family had to get their like their backstory, their reason why they kind of technically did this thing, because the mirrored mother um was kind of just ticked off that this girl got a life and this mirrored girl didn't. So she just got bitter and created her own mirror family, and then ultimately created a mirror world and this and that. And mirror world went up against real world. What a bizarre reality challenge that was. Um, but yeah, so I think it would have made sense if this girl would have probably been like a president or like some kind of political figure. Then I think that would have made sense for this being the way it was. But because that wasn't written that way, I don't know. Just didn't quite make sense of how all these mirror things had to be presented. It was kind of odd. Um, but anyways, so when looking at this movie, a lot of stuff was drawn out, and it was just kind of like, okay, like it just seemed like how exactly, like, people would get defeated, then come back to get defeated, then come back, and it was just kind of like, just get to the point already. Like, if you're ultimately not going to be able to absolutely run away from these things, then it's gotta be like, you gotta like come up with some kind of plan to get rid of these things. It's not like they all like broke into some like sporting goods store somewhere and like started to like gun up, or like buy or get swords or get knives or get like, they didn't break in any they didn't break in into anywhere useful. They just kind of went into their neighbor's home and then had to fight their way through that, which was kind of like, well, like, how was that any better from where they were already at? Like, it wasn't any better than where they were already at, because ultimately every single uh like the family of the neighbors were quickly incapacitated. So like so ultimately this family had to go out of the way to win back this home for the good side, but then otherwise just they ultimately had left that home. So they fought their way all through this house for no reason, to otherwise justifiably leave, because they knew that their mirrored selves would realize that they were going to go to their neighbors and this and that. And I was just like, so we have so much aspect of these things, like the family trying to drive and run over these things with a car, but that doesn't quite work because these things quickly adapt and just kind of run on top of the car and do all this interesting stuff. Bizarrely, these jumpsuit hooligans, mirrorverse characters, mostly just have like scissors and then bizarrely whatever thing else, like handcuffs or something like that. It's weird. But, anyways, yeah. I can say that I overall liked the movie once it got to pick up, but there were some rough things about this movie. But ultimately, looking at it, like overall, I just thought it was a good experience. I thought it was. I could say that for most of this movie, it was in the positive. I just felt that like it took us a while to get there. It took us like it felt like a lot of eating of time at some points, and I just wish that it ultimately exact in all actuality wasn't like that. So I think, Darren, in fact, that's all I could say to go out of my way to talk about this movie, because there isn't honestly overall much to really say about it. So let's move on. All right. So Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder. I believe I had mentioned this movie at some point of somewhere, and I dare say was going to say that eventually I was going to review this movie. I was going to talk about it. I think when I reviewed the remake of Jacob's Ladder, I ultimately said I was going to eventually see the original at some point. I wanted to. And by dabbing my way into Crackle, I was able to finally watch this original film. When looking at this film, reasonably, I think I had too much faith or high hopes into this film. At least the remake seems to have one solid, cohesive story throughout, and then maybe at some points it does adjust, but it seems like it takes what is going on in the original and actually makes more of a solid story than what the original actually does. It seems like this man is going in between a dream and reality like state. We never really know exactly what is real and what is fake. I thought it was interesting that Macaulay Culkin was even in this film. I was like, Macaulay Culkin's in this film? Wow. Interesting. Like, I didn't think he was in this film. I didn't know. Um, Evidently Macaulay Culkin playing yet another, uh, like, uh, uh, kid for a family. Anyway, so Jacob's Ladder is a story about a veteran of Vietnam who goes home and decides to be a postal worker, while eventually getting chiropractic adjustments and ultimately trying to make sense of his life because ultimately he has to find said old friends and kind of rehash if they're going through the same things or what's going on. Because they are starting to see some bizarrish stuff. They are starting to not really quite understand what is reality and what is not. Um, like, if anything, people are starting to lose their minds and getting grossed out and kind of seeing these weird, bizarro like things going on in the backgrounds, which they're involved in. All of a sudden, they're just seeing somebody just like, blah, 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 blah. It's like their heads are just kind of like really going like a million miles an hour, and it doesn't really quite make sense. Um, but yeah, so I think that this movie, I had a lot of like hopes about it, but then when actually going into this film, I feel that there is too much of this kind of like tug of war match that is kind of going on. There is a lot of kind of mixture of things, and I think there are some stuff where I think that this project ultimately kind of does break down as somebody wanting to like a writer or a director or whatever wanting to do kind of like a one of a kind film, because this does feel like a one of a kind film. Um, because even the remake of Jacob's Ladder looks more of a uniformed like movie, where the original kind of does span all over the place. It kind of goes into a much more bizarro movie. Um, and this and that. It takes a lot of risks. I think those risks do ultimately pay out, but then again, you're like, there's so much tug of war going on, of kind of like tug of war of like a character being like kind of like taken somewhere and then dropped, taken somewhere and dropped, taken somewhere, drop, taken somewhere, drop, and that kind of happens frequently throughout the movie. Um, it seems like this movie, like towards more of the back half of the movie, seems to be having some kind of momentum to where it could get somewhere, but then towards the very like how this movie ends, it ultimately does kind of kill everything. It does just kind of kill everything off. It does kind of really give you a real like sense of just like, okay, well, um, like this is any number of things, uh, and this and that. So, but I think like when looking at it, I think this kind of does quasi end much more better than the remake does. Like I think I like I kind of like a movie where at the end of the day that like you can have a throwaway movie. I don't mind that. I don't have a movie that you can just completely throw away at the end of the day. That's fine. Um, like kind of like this movie does kind of barely kind of remind me of like the Ashton Kutcher movie like Butterfly Effect in some ways because like for how Ashton Kutcher like goes through that and his life consistently adjusts. That kind of feels kind of how this movie tends to do. It kind of like consistently adjusts and changes, and all of a sudden you have to re know a brand new set of characters, and then they kind of have a tug of war going throughout the film of what you're going to see next, and this and that. So there, in fact, let's get into the story in a spoiler sense so we can get this out of the way and say goodbye, everybody. So, spoilers. Spoilers. Five, four, three, two, one. Spoilers. Spoilers. If you guys just want to know how this movie tends to go, again, I just kind of feel like disappointed. I honestly feel disappointed about this movie if I'm being honest. Cause in my mind, I kind of like the story sounds so good. And then when you kind of start to go along in the movie, you're like, man, I could see a lot of potential here. I can see so much potential. Cause it seems like everything that is presented within this film feels so one of a kind. It feels like you don't see this story very often, and I thought that it was so refreshing. Even though I saw the remake of this movie, again, this movie felt very refreshing. It felt like a different kind of way to attack a film, but ultimately, it feels like this movie wanted to kind of just chuck a lot of things out there. I felt that this movie kind of really did feel like a gigantic showcasing of said people working on this film. Like everybody was so hungry to do a one of a kind like film. Everybody was trying to make this as a one of a kind as possible, and the actors wanted to go into this doing like a one of a kind like project that they dare say would never probably do again, just because of how infrequent like a Tim Robbins would probably do um, a movie with kind of like Hellraiser looking like characters at the end of the day, or deformed looking characters, or um, monstrous looking characters. Looking at this movie, I think that a lot of this stuff, a way that they kind of like attack all this, attacking it in the fact of like having this person eventually seeing some kind of crazy visuals. I think for most of the time, it it kind of really a lot of the stuff was so quick, or a lot of the stuff didn't quite like it didn't really feel like it overall quite registered, or it just overall just didn't feel like I would want to question how exactly this would be related to a post traumatic stress kind of syndrome. Like, I don't quite really understand how, like, all of a sudden people could be seeing like Hellraiser like figures, like these demonic esh like characters, um, like being placed throughout this film. I was kind of like, okay, like, so we have a character that ultimately is a Vietnam veteran, ultimately going out of their way to go home and be a post officeman. And eventually we have it to where all these army guys are otherwise re-meeting up and kind of mentioning to one another that um their post army life is, let's just say, not quite normal. They're seeing some things. They're seeing some stuff that is not quite explained. Like their dreams are very like, oh, like man, my dreams are crazy and they're like they don't quite make sense. All the while that these people are kind of going about their normal day, getting back adjustments from their chiropractor, and then ultimately they're just bizarrely talking to somebody, and their face is deformed, or their portion of their body is deformed, or like this and that, and then all of a sudden we like drop out of one scene entirely, and then we just restart again and have this story, have this guy in some other life. This we like just drop off and have this guy just in another life, and we like basically say that all the stuff that he saw before was all a dream, was all this just bizarro dream. But that bizarro dream just continues to have a tug of war with said other life. So like with all the stuff that starts to tug of war and stuff like that, and the more that we start to see like Tim Robbins really eventually seeing his supposed girlfriend having this dance with this demoness like creature that eventually seems to be having seemingly dance sex with her, and to where ultimately this same demon goes out of the way to kill this person supposedly, but it was again all a dream again. Looking at it, like the visual of him eventually getting so sick that he needed to be um dipped in a vat of ice water. Like, yeah, that feels like a very one of a kind like visual being placed in a movie, but like the being dumped in ice, I honestly and truly believe didn't really help the story much. But a lot of, you could say a lot of stuff didn't quite really help the story much, because ultimately with them eventually getting this conspiracy-esque like thing, that ultimately all these veterans are all of a sudden were getting all these medications via when they fought in Vietnam. That is kind of having some side effects when they leave the military now. Um, and everybody's trying to keep it hush hush and under wraps. Like I could see like this person being much more like how in the other Jacob Slatter, where there seems to be people out to get him, where in this movie it's just like, okay, somebody starts the engine in their car and their car explodes, and then like it never feels like these people's lives are in jeopardy, because all they really see is just all these uh goofy looking demonic faces and this and that. Like it seems like all this is just a mixed bag of stuff, and I wish that there was like some like cohesive thing going on throughout this entire thing. Like have have all of this stuff is just all just kind of jumbled all together again, seemingly much more like a showcasing of how many things can we do in a film, rather than having any kind of cohesion of anything. um I think when looking at it, like they were just like, oh man, we really want to work with Macaulay Culkin, so how are we going to work him into this movie? Well, let's just have Tim Robbins have this alternate life within this movie where he's like a father of three and he has a wife and this and that and everything's copacetic, and then this and that, and then we're just gonna drop him back into this dream world where he's this veteran and this and that, and like. But ultimately, when it all breaks down, it all goes down to us towards the very end of this film, finding out that this guy was still in Vietnam and he was dead. I was like, wow, like that is kind of interesting to think about it in that way, because you completely throw away the movie, but then when also kind of looking at it, you could say that this could be like this guy's way of dealing with his ultimate death. Like, what is someone's thought process when they die, or what is their thought process when they are in the midst of death? Like, what is going on in their brain before they die? So, like, at the very end of this movie, does feel like a throwaway movie, but when looking at it, I do appreciate the ending, because it's like, okay, well, like, we could ultimately say that all the stuff that we were shown in between, like the Vietnam and the beginning of this movie, and the way this all ends, is instead of giving like everybody like a one clear cut, like out of all the things that were kind of a mixed bag of stuff going on in this movie, like, well, what is the real true clear cut story? And at the end, we do none of all that to tell you that it's just like, well, no, none of it is all going to be the clear cut story. The clear cut story is he was still in the military and he died. It's like, wow, that's like that's one clear way of just going for probably whoever worked on this to just like, yeah, we're just gonna have a boatload of fun with this, because at the end of the day, the ending is just gonna like put us. It's just gonna reset the whole thing. So like we could have this character as a woman in some reality, or we could have this character um as a demon himself, or we could have any number of like extravagant ways of going about this, because again, towards the end of the movie, it all just resets. So this movie could have been breakdown entirely of what do people think about before they die, or maybe in the transition of death. So I liked that aspect about the movie. Um, but then other than that, I just kind of feel overall that it's just kind of like a jumbled mess. Like I just feel like this movie's a jumbled mess, and I was just like, ah, like I'm just kind of disappointed. Like, man, it feels like on paper this sounds like a really good movie, but then when you actually finally like watch said things that you read on paper, like it's just like, oh, it's like, oh, like it's, yeah. So yeah, it's just how they tried to like do these like character jumping through hoops to where like this guy all of a sudden bizarrely couldn't walk, and that like kind of brought this like, oh, kind of like shock value thing, but then ultimately the chiropractor just does a couple adjustments, and then the character can walk. It's just like at a lot of portions you can just break down within this movie and just go out of your way to say that this movie was overall like a shock value movie. Like that's what it was trying to present. It overall was trying to just present a shock value movie, and then the shock, if you made it all the way through the movie, was just like, oh yeah, all this weird, bizarre stuff that you saw. Yeah, like this movie kind of in a lot of ways kind of reminded me of like 12 Monkeys. It kind of reminded me of like the Bruce Willis movie 12 Monkeys in a lot of ways. Where like that movie, it tended to kind of go all over the place and kind of like try to do this like mad scramble of figuring all this weird and bizarro stuff out. But then at the end of the day, like the movie 12 Monkeys like resets itself. So I kind of felt like Jacob's Ladder was in the same vein of the movie 12 Monkeys. So I think that's all I'm going to go and say, talk about this movie. Um, I don't really quite know that Tim Robbins really gave a good performance, but I think with the end of all this, like I think him being added in this film was like I think there was nobody else that probably could have done this better. To be brutally honest, I think if anybody else would have done it, I just don't think that because I think Robbins is just so well wound. I think he's so well rounded, well rounded that at within this film that you could buy that this guy is just an everyman and that this story kind of needed an everyman. So, anyways, I'm gonna go out of my way to get out of here because more videos to do, more things to talk to you about. I hope at the end of the day I could say that I could be watching a lot. I could watch a lot more movies for you guys to like or enjoy hearing about. So without a doubt, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.